all of our millions and millions of brothers and sisters out there that we need to bring over to white sympathy, when they hear the word genocide, they see in their heads piles of bodies, piles and piles, and the vast majority of the piles of bodies of people who have been starved to death or gassed or shot or whatever it might be, the vast majority of that footage, photographs that they see are what they believe to be the Jewish race, victims of what they believe were white people. And so by using the word genocide, you invoke the memory of white people genociding non-white people. You simultaneously are invoking in them the spectacle of mounds of dead bodies, of corpses. And they look around the world and they don't see mounds of bodies of white people. They don't see thousands and thousands of white people emaciated and piled up. They don't see camps where white people are shoved in there and are being gassed. They don't see white people digging giant trenches and then being machine gunned. They don't see it. So they'll say there's no genocide of whites. So you have the white person in front of you will say, I don't see these things. And so everything I just articulated. So there's no genocide happening. And you have also now brought to mind in them the genocide of non-white people by white people. You have massively undermined your effort to bring them over to some sort of white sympathy at that point. Massively. Now that's in the field, in conversation with the brothers and sisters that we need to bring over. Now, in conversation with somebody who advocates for the use of the concept white genocide, they'll say, aha, Jason, but there's a rule book somewhere that says that genocide is all of these different things. And my retort to that is, so what? That rule book is not in the minds of the millions of brothers and sisters out there that we need to bring over to white well-being or to some degree of white sympathy. It's not in their heads. We have to deal with what's in their head. So you say, aha, but I could educate every single one of them. You have only so much time to disagree and to educate with an interlocutor, somebody you're speaking with, an audience. You have only so much time. You would be wasting your time at that point trying to convince them that genocide is so much more than just piles of bodies. And even if you did convince them, I can say this first, even if you did convince them that, aha, here's the actual rule book about the word genocide by the UN, you now have burnt up your time to disagree and persuade. You have, and therefore you're not going to be able to move on to other subject matter to empower them, other concepts to give them to use, because they are not going to go out into the world with your rule book from the UN and tell everybody that genocide is so much bigger, because they know they're going to look like a crank, just like you look like a crank to them. I mean, that's just a reality. I tried it too. I went out there, I put it in the field. You look like a crank. So they know they're going to look like a crank. They're going to look like a crazy person to everyone. So they're not going to repeat that like they would repeat white erasure. Like we just got, although maybe he created it on his own, Mark Dice, to say white erasure. So the other issue is that if you did convince them, if you showed them, here's the UN, and you've already made a fatal flaw. So I don't know why I should bother arguing why you should not use white genocide and should use instead white erasure, because you've already made the fatal flaw. But I can just go down. It's just like a series of errors when it comes to the use of that concept. If you convince a person that, okay, here's the rule book, I'm shoving it down your throat, genocide is much bigger according to the UN, they're still going to walk away from that concluding that real genocide, tangible genocide, is government rounding people up and killing them. And that, yeah, maybe there can be this soft genocide. You have not given them anything that they're going to be willing to repeat and given them anything to act upon. There's no concept there that they can use. They can't go out into the world and say white genocide. It's soft genocide, though. It's soft genocide. Well, why care about that then? If it's genocide by way of people's decisions, people are being encouraged to take other mates. Well, that's still their decision in the end. People are being encouraged to not, white people are encouraged to take other mates. White people are encouraged to not have children. Okay, well, that's still their decision. Yeah, they were encouraged to do it. Yeah, it's in the media, but it was still their decision. Somebody making the decision to genocide themselves, even though it's by way of encouragement, is not seen as tantamount to rounding people up and executing them. It's that simple. White erasure needs no definition. Here's the beauty of white erasure. You don't have to provide a person with a definition, and they don't had to have heard it in the media to know what it is right away. So when I was out in the field and I was talking to people about what's happening to us, when I talked about white erasure, they immediately understood that that meant fewer white people, that meant white statues of white people coming down, that meant white norms being eradicated, that it meant, and it was, we could go on and on, signs, street signs being changed, history books being rewritten. White erasure is something that is ubiquitous across the West. What have I done by giving people a concept for what is everywhere? I have just turned my victimizer's strength into my strength. Because now, when they go out into the world, every time they see any white erasure, they'll say, aha, white erasure. Aha, white erasure. Something that can very easily, without looking like a crank, be shared with family members, with friends, with strangers. Again, I know that people who are just like ardent fans of that guy, and they just want to stick with white genocide because of it, they'll say, well, white genocide also means those things. Well, too bad. You're tacking on all of these like arguments after the fact. You don't have time for that shit. Are you going to follow every person that you've, out of the 100, the one that you convinced, here's the UN definition, and so it actually means more. It means this soft genocide where people are convinced to do it and then they do it of their own volition. You've convinced them. Are you going to follow them everywhere so that when they see a sign changed or when they see and tell them, well, that's genocide as well, that, and they're not going to believe that anyhow. They're going to say, no, it's not. No, it's not. These other people just want to be represented. White people are, you know, they could, as I say, agree with you that they're being convinced to not have children or to reproduce with other races. But in the world where the signs are changing and the statues are coming down, well, that's just other races of people wanting to see themselves in the world. What is that doing? That is centering our victimizer and keeping us in an orbit around our victimizer, which means that he decides how much we suffer. He decides when our end is time instead of us. When we are talking about white erasure, what does that do? That centers us. So a lot of these people who show up and they want to feign intelligence, and I find it very irritating. They want to feign intelligence and they show up and they're like, but Jason, And they'll go grab some like obscure word out of a dictionary or thesaurus somewhere, and they toss in there. But Jason, white genocide, XYZ, and white erasure, ABC. They'll make this argument as though it were taking place in a laboratory somewhere, rather than in the field, rather than in the minds of the audience.